One of the greatest fears that I have for our generation is that, if we're lucky and if we grow to an older age, that we would look back on our lives and not remember it. Hi, Capucine.
Hi.
I've been really curious to have a conversation with you for a while. I've always been drawn to the way that you see the world and the way that you, through your art, you challenge a viewer's perception of their world, as well as your attention to attention and awareness and presence as humans. But, one of the greatest fears that I have for our generation is that, if we're lucky and if we grow to an older age, that we would look back on our lives and not remember it, because we are living in a lot of chaos and a lot of instability. I'm really excited to talk with you today about how you think about, through your work, through your art, through the way that you build community, how to bring back a sense of presence into our lives. So Capucine, you were born in 1989 in Zurich, Switzerland. But throughout your life, you've lived in many different places, from France to China to the US, and now you live in Bucharest, Romania. And you and I met in Savannah, Georgia at SCAD. So we went to the Savannah College of Art and Design together. But since then, you've completed projects from, ranging in and out of the art world, from, large scale, decades long paintings to screen printing workshops to handmade books. And now you're serving as the artistic director of the EIDOS Foundation and of Unfinished Festival, which you and I are collaborating on together this year in a couple of upcoming weeks. It's coming up, which I'm really excited to chat about with you. In your artist statement, you write that your work is a way to explore, process, and challenge the semi-absurd lines that humans draw around themselves and all over the world, from borders to languages to media to class, politics, and prejudice, and that you became an artist because it seemed like the only way to disentangle these lines and to try to live each day with meaning and to make every encounter count. What does it mean for you, both as a human and as an artist, to try to live each day with meaning and make every encounter count?
I think it's something that I'm searching for all the time, and this is why I'm doing work about it. This started from something really at an early age where I would go on walks with my grandma and we would meet people, and then she would say hello, saying this thing that if we all live on the same planet, why don't we greet each other? It stuck with me for a long time. Then I lived in China, as you mentioned, and it was back in the year 2000s, early 2000s, and at a time where there were not so many foreigners. And I remember learning to deflect stares, because I was a foreigner, by smiling and acknowledging. So it's like a deflection. And then also the other complexity of being in a city with so many people as Shanghai, which is like almost half of France's population in one city. You can't really acknowledge everybody. And then moving to Savannah, Georgia, as you mentioned, where we met, where it was a whole other thing. There's this idea of Southern hospitality, which I really felt like people say hello on the street and so on. But then there's also this new thing of like stranger danger, which honestly in Shanghai I never had, and embedded with a lot of racism for sure and a lot of larger issues. And not knowing how to cope with that, I came up with this project of literally trying to count how many people I acknowledge and how many people I ignored each day. This was like a method I first started during a day. I'm marking on my hand, left hand people I actually encountered, and right hand the ones I acknowledged. And then it became a 1-year performance. And I was really interested in how my perception of others would change and evolve. So it was like a exercise for myself, but of course, because it was public and visible, it became also a way to address this, because people were asking me, what's this? What are the crosses? What do they mean? Because I was really surprised that what the types of people who would respond. You'd think that the people in school, artists or art students, would be the most responsive, but actually it was someone at the grocery store, someone sitting on the bus. This usually happens with projects like I have this sort of recipe for this one project, and as I do it, I realize, oh, this is the next thing that should happen. For example, I didn't factor in touch in this project, and I realized what happens when I bump into someone accidentally. So that made me think, okay, the next one should be related to touch. And so 10 years later, I did the same exercise 1 year, but I was counting the number of people I talked to versus the number of people I touched. And then the pandemic happened and it all became a whole interesting thing. All in all, the conclusion I've had this with this kind of project is that it's a choice. For example, a year ago, I started these, I call them journal de larmes, like tears diary. And I'm counting every day if I'm crying or laughing and the reasons. And thinking that really it's, you choose the people, a lot of the people you surround yourselves with, you choose the activities you're doing in the day, you choose when there's a situation, if you're going to laugh or cry about it. But still, I felt the need to do this project because I feel like I'm not succeeding in this choice.
I think a lot about how we're sort of like figuring out what touch means, what saying hello to someone means again, because we were so isolated from one another. Within my own body, I've been noticing like this apprehension come up when I meet someone new or I'm like reconnecting with someone more so than I ever had. I think before the pandemic, I really do feel kind of like a baby, like relearning social interaction all over again.
I think before there was not so much a need to ask ourselves these questions, and then it all exploded. But for sure, the shift that I'm really sad about is what you're saying of like this reluctance to meeting, or this feeling that a surprise is a bad thing, or something, the unknown is a bad thing. But actually, that's where all the most beautiful things happen, all the serendipity, and which are very difficult to replicate in technology. And we tried.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think because so many of us are working remotely too, right? Where we're actually interfacing with the screen first and then the human. And so there's always this sort of barrier in between that relationship. And I think that's also like what art can do. I think a lot of times people perceive art to be this thing that's like, I create this thing in the world and then the viewer looks at it, right? Or maybe it makes them think differently. But it can be incredibly interactive in the way that we're learning about ourselves in the moment, in the process of it. And I think that's really interesting to me to kind of crack open. So there's a piece that you have created called Human Strokes. And it's actually, I think, right behind you.
Yes, that's the one.
It was a 10-year lawn painting that you did, I believe, where you marked a stroke per death that you heard or read about. So you kept journals of your sources, you placed the marks on the map geographically. So each kind of mark that you see here on this canvas behind you, like if you heard about 20 deaths in New York, then you made 20 marks in the geographic location of New York on the canvas. If you heard about 20,000 deaths in Syria, you made 20,000 marks. What's interesting about this project is that if areas of the canvas are thickened with paint, it could mean that there's a lot of deaths happening in that area, or it could be because of the media that you consume that focuses on these places.
I would say that it's mostly impacted by the media rather than the number of deaths. And it's a very, very biased and warped map, because even looking at it now, I'm so embarrassed at the geography of it, because France is right in the middle, of course. These are all things that after studying maps, I realized, oh yeah, this is the basics of like bad map problems with maps. But at the time, I didn't know all the theory behind map making. I thought there's also this interesting and sad contradiction that a lot of lives, you only hear about them once they're taken away. And also addressing an overall, I think, cultural thing about death, that it's so taboo in some cultures, in others it's much more integrated in life. And I also was exploring these ideas. But in terms of like teaching me about life, I think I realized that numbers, or at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, don't mean anything until you attach a story to them. And I think this can be very related to technology, to news, etc., because yeah, until I do 20,000, like I don't know what it means, 2020, 200, it doesn't mean anything until I know and I translate it to time or space. So there's this exercise of translation, which in a way it's what journalists do, in a way it's what technology does, or it's what writers do by translating numbers into something that's relatable.
I find that I've become a stronger writer when I'm become a critical reader, when I'm understanding the different media sources that I'm taking in, when I'm talking or listening to various perspectives of people. And then it also makes me think about the rise of artificial life and how, the surge of generative AI in particular, billions of dollars are being invested in this, and there's still a lot that's unknown. A lot of the conversations about it right now are, in my opinion, still very much centered on the large language models themselves and the technology and what the technology can do, and less about the actual people that are starting to be affected by it. So as an artist yourself, like, do you use AI tools in your work? If so, how?
As an artist, I use it little, honestly, very little. When it's about like doing a kind of census of what already exists and reading it, synthesizing it, and making a summary, okay, this is something that would take me weeks and takes it seconds. So in this sense, I use it. Or also to get rid of the obvious ideas, because the only thing it can do is recycle what's already there, right? In the end, you have this illusion that you're creating something new, but you're recycling.
I've done the same thing. Like, I've used ChatGPT, particularly when thinking about like how to write a headline for an essay, or what's the like summary of what I want to write. And I'm like, I don't want ChatGPT to write this for me, but I want ChatGPT to tell me what's already out there that like I could offer a unique viewpoint on. And I have to wonder, like, going back to this topic around the media that we consume, I'm also like, what is the media that ChatGPT is also consuming? So it really kind of creates all these questions about like, what's true, what's not, and how we can like tap into our critical thinking when we're, I think, using these tools.
My personal work as an artist, I think it has so much to do with doing things by hand and what happens in your consciousness when you research. It's like this difference when you read a summary of a book versus when you read the whole book. Yeah, you'll get, like, for some things, it's totally fine. You get the big idea. But the impact it has on your long-term consciousness is totally different. So it all depends for what.
Even before all of this buzz about AI, like, there was a lot of questions around the algorithms that we, are interfaced with on a daily basis. And a lot of us are now questioning, like, what are we really being fed? And like, if I tap this thing on TikTok or like Instagram, how is that going to completely mess up my feed? Because this algorithm is now going to be so focused on what this one thing that I tapped. It's hard. It feels like it's becoming increasingly hard as a human to actually employ this critical thinking and to trust ourselves when a lot of these preferences and sort of ideas are being pushed at us in a way that can be a little aggressive sometimes. And so, I know that to say the least. Yeah. How does this figure into conversations you're having with yourself as an artist, and what you've learned about how we can protect and also celebrate our human capacity to process and interpret ideas and information?
Well, I definitely don't have all the answers, but I think that I find is just the importance of preserving these spaces where you're not dependent on technology to make choices for you. And yeah, sometimes it's easier to use, it is easier and faster to use Google Maps, but what happens when you force yourself to remember that all tools are made by humans, all humans have flaws, those flaws are reflected in the tools. Whenever you try to make anything, you bring in your own flaws and your own bias into what you create. I think if we can understand this basic thing, then we can understand that every tool that we use has an amount of bias. And this is again why artists still have an important role to play in this sense, because we make it so transparent. There are all sorts of strategies, but that in the end all relate to preserving a kind of balance.
So you and I have both engaged with a lot of maps in our collective work. You have a lot of different projects that have explored maps, that have challenge maps, that have documented maps. And you gave a presentation a few years ago at Unfinished Festival where you mentioned, throughout history, men, and you say this consciously, have drawn abstract lines onto maps and have caused decades of repercussions that we're still experiencing all over the world today. I think a lot about how, as artists, as designers, as technologists, we hold a lot of power, whether we're creating maps or not, in the way that people perceive the world and engage with the world around us. I was a designer for Google Maps, and I was working there for about 5 years, and I no longer work there. I feel conflicted about the experience because I was walking into a situation where a lot of the technology had been kind of built for car drivers in the US. And then we were working at a time where we were trying to expand the technology across the world to where car driving is not the the centric mode of transportation. So we were kind of asking ourselves and should not not be, and we were asking ourselves, how do we make it more inclusive and accessible for the millions of motorbike drivers out there, particularly in cities that are incredibly dense? How do we make it accessible for public transit systems, and in particular public transit systems that are informal, where there may not be a set bus route or time that, again, millions of people take every day? And I feel, I still feel conflicted about the work because on one hand, there was a lot of work done to actually put more businesses and routes and transportation modes onto Google Maps for the first time in history, where that allowed more people to feel seen and feel like, yes, I can actually use this tool to get around my city. But it came in this world of post-colonialism. This app was first and foremost made in the US, made in Silicon Valley. And I was walking into this at 27 years old, so you're super young, being thrown into these huge constructs. I think for me, it really, forced me to look at my own power and my own identity and my own relationship to design. It also kind of made me a little angry at the design industry because I was like, wait a minute, why are we talking about tools and pixels and sort of UI trends and not about the power we hold here and how these massive tools are being shaped? These questions I'm going to be asking probably for the rest of my career. But I'm excited to talk with you about this because in your work, you're directly really asking these questions as it relates to maps.
Well, this is also something Marina Abramovich was always saying, that if you're not slightly uncomfortable, then you're not creating new meaning. You're only repeating, what you already know. And as you're pointing out, what is just preserving the existing problems. In a way, artists have it a bit easier than designers, perhaps, because you have this possibility that it may not impact them because they don't use it every day. Our mutual friend Ramona is the one who told me once that the highest form of intelligence is adaptability, and I think she's right. Technology is not necessary. It's not necessarily meant to do this, from my understanding, especially places like Google, where they're gonna encourage you to make new products, and then you're assessed based on if your new thing is gonna be the most whatever. The highest reach, then you get a raise according to that, not according to how well you're maintaining what's existing or how intelligently you're integrating things or adapting. But actually, new can also just be a new connection. Doesn't mean a new thing. It can be a new connection between existing things. That is also me. This is also new. And this, I think, issue is, it applies to what we're talking about now with events, with art, with technology, but also with how we treat the planet. It's so much about more and more and not preserving and adapting and reusing. And it's a big mind shift we have to do.
Yeah. And I love this part about shifting what we value, shifting what we're incentivizing, shifting what we're celebrating, because if we aren't acknowledging and celebrating the moments where we can find adaptability or looking at, in this project with Google Maps, it was so much of what I was trying to do, as well as trying to figure out for myself and the teams I was working with of what already exists, who can we talk to, what communities can we partner with, how do we create this bidirectional relationship as much as we can. But in these constructs of capitalism and in large corporations, it's not always incentivized to do those things. And that's the thing that when we talk about adaptability, how do we as a society adapt and shift the way and what we're valuing, because it really does affect the planet and, civil society and like equity and all of these things in very direct ways. That's what makes me so excited about Unfinished Festival. Like, how do we celebrate the process of navigating the existing realities that we came into this world with, and imagine and explore alternate paths. And that is what is Unfinished. That's the process that we're in. So you're the artistic director for the festival. I'm going to be helping out with moderating and interviewing the incredible lineup of speakers that we have this year. I'm so excited. I can't wait. It's going to happen in a few weeks in September 22nd through 24th. Yes, 22 through 24th. For those who aren't attending in person, there will be videos and stuff that will come from it that they can watch later. I'd love to hear from you what Unfinished is and what you're most excited about for this year's festival.
It's trying to make connections between everything, basically addressing the fact that you generally have a festival for music, and then you have a tech conference for people in tech, and then you have a medical conference for people in medicine. But it's very hard to connect all these people together and get a chance to hear from totally different people, and not just hear, but connect with them on a profound level. So that's what Unfinished tries to do, to fill these gaps. And it does that by inviting all sorts of people as both speakers, but also artists, musicians, within the stage, let's say, even if stage is also a fluid concept at Unfinished. Also within the community, so the people who come and join. And the formats in which we gather, because we have, it's like a whole day, several days from morning to night. We start with wellness, yoga, meditation, these kind of things in the morning, or walks, things like this. Then we have workshops, we have talks, we have lectures, we have music, we have spoken poetry, dance.
You also have a unique process in how you approach festival attendance. So attendees pay with their time, not with money. And you select attendees through an application process that if they get accepted, they don't have to pay money to attend. Instead, they pay with their time. So why focus on time? And what was the impetus for doing it this way? And what have you learned from this experiment, a few years into it?
I can't take credit for the origins of the idea. That was Christian. But it started in big part because he didn't want Unfinished to be this kind of conference that people go to and they just care about the main speaker. They sit, they take a few notes, and then they leave. Their company pays for them to attend. They don't care so much. And also the speakers come fly in, fly out. They don't connect, they don't sit and have a meal with you. So he didn't want to do that. So he thought, okay, the best way to do that is to create a kind of FOMO perhaps, but also to get people to really, only the ones who really care to come. And how do you do that? You force them to go through some kind of process. And then I'm the one who attached the word of time to it, because this is like a long dream of mine because so much of my work relates to time. And I really feel like it's this universal currency, like 1 hour. It's so relatable where whatever your culture, or one day at least, wherever you are on the planet, maybe depends on the season, but in the latitude. But the concept of time is super universal. Technology is all about saving time. Like, in a way, it is the most expensive currency. And so it became this quick way of explaining the concept, which is basically, if you invest yourself in the process, then you're going to be invested in the thing itself. So people, it's kind of a natural filter. People who come to Unfinished really want to be there because they put in the time to attend. And it creates a really, really special community. And it's true that it stops some people from coming, probably. Lots of people will start the application and drop it, but that's fine, because if they don't have the attention span to do that, then they're not the kind of people that we like, who would be ready to have a serendipitous encounter, to really be invested and ask questions. And yeah, it creates a real magic from having this process.
I think that another great part about Unfinished is that the conversations that people have with each other seem to really invite new understandings of like what the role of art is, what the role of media is. As you're thinking about going into this festival and just life in general, what's one thing that you wish more people understood about the role of an artist today, especially as so much of the conversation is about AI right now in media and technology and art? What are we not really seeing about the role of an artist today that would be useful, I think, for us to know?
I think that it's not confined to the art space, what we think of as an art space, that it's not confined to galleries, to museums. It's, I mean, of course, that's part of the equation, and it's a wonderful space to work with because it has these nice white walls, this clean silence around it. Like you can do so many amazing things, but that's such a small part of the equation, I think. And an artist can have a much, much bigger role, and actually the impact is often higher outside of the art world. I think people should not be afraid to invite artists to do things. Like the creativity can be used in so many ways. I do a lot of work helping other people write, for example, and not because I'm a writer, but I think because I have the mind of someone who can, I'm terrible with words, in fact, but it's just looking for context and then extracting meaning or making parallels, making metaphors. Like this is the bigger work, right? Creating meaning. And maybe it can be extended to all jobs, like just like being someone in tech that's not confined in the world of tech. You impact lives across the board. It just all points out to the same conclusions, the same thing we're trying to get to with Unfinished, that is to make these bridges between these bubbles, between these trenches that are really stopping us from connecting, from understanding the context of things that we make, of how we work, of having a proper impact. Because if we don't see beyond them, then our impact is limited, and we can't act responsibly if we don't comprehend, or if we at least don't try to bridge. So the role of the artist is much larger than how we think. And yeah, we can, you can hire artists for all sorts of other things. Also, like do residencies, like this is a great way to create bridges. Labs that have residencies are terrific. And it also goes for the art world. The art world should be a bit less pompous about having artists that are like expanding the term of artist and art forms and what qualifies you to be an artist or not. The work has to come from both sides. A bridge has two parts.
So I will leave with one last question for you, Capucine. What is one request or conscious action that tech makers like myself can do to care for or support artists in this age of AI?
To buy art from living artists. We all make gifts all the time, and we have to pick our brains for what to give. Why not gift art?
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I can't wait for Unfinished, September 22nd through 24th. Thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you so much.